So we have crossed on Route 60 into Fayette County, and we are now driving by the alloy metallurgical plant. At one time, this plant employed over 12,000 people. The most recent estimates I've seen is less than 300. But this is the plant that was built in the 1930s by Union Carbide to produce metallurgical, I think, like silica and things that they used within Union Carbide. And they will build the Hawksness Dam to power this plant right here. Hey y'all, my name is Adina Barnett Miller, but I'm known to my students as Mrs. B. I've been passionate about West Virginia history for as long as I can remember, but my mom would tell you it all started when I was 3 years old and she bought me a West Virginia counties puzzle at Gino's Pizza. I've taught history in Ripley, West Virginia for over 20 years now, and I'm an adjunct professor who teaches college West Virginia history to high school students. Please join me for West Virginia History with Mrs. B, a field trip across the Mountain State to walk in the footsteps of those who came before us. Hey y'all, it's West Virginia History with Mrs. B coming to you from Hawksness State Park in Ansted, Fayette County, West Virginia. And we're going to talk a little bit today about Hawksness as a geographic feature, the impact that the Hawksness Tunnel has had on industrial legislation in the United States, as well as the fact that this is an amazing state park that was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. So let's talk about this sign for a second. It points out the fact that Hawksness was once called Marshall's Pillar, and that was in honor of Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, John Marshall, who happened to be Thomas Jefferson's cousin and who really made the Supreme Court what it is today. He's going to serve as Chief Justice for over 30 years. And the name didn't stick. It officially later became known as Hawksness because there were hawks' nests all over the cliffs that we're going to show you here in a little bit. However, when the Chesapeake and Ohio started building the train down in the Gorge in the 1870s, the hawks took off and they never came back. We're going to talk about the tunnel here in a little bit, but we wanted to point out this sign and show you the beautiful roadside park that was built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. There were 2 Civilian Conservation Corps camps here in Fayette County who did this work on these original state parks that were established in the 1930s during the Great Depression and the New Deal. It's just awesome to think that these buildings are almost 100 years old and they're still beautiful and, used by people on a daily basis. All right, here we are at Lover's Leap at Hawksness State Park. And in my opinion, probably one of the most picturesque views in all of West Virginia. So we're going to talk a little bit about the New River Gorge itself and the history of the New River Gorge. So if you come this way and you look over the railing, you're going to see the New River. I mean, it is just breathtaking. And at the bottom, of course, you see that train bridge, and you see the train tracks running along there. Even the earliest explorers of West Virginia knew that there was coal in what will become West Virginia. They just didn't know how to get it out. I mean, as you can see, this is rugged topography. And so after the Civil War, we're going to see rich industrialists from both the United States and Europe invest tons of money into West Virginia. And so, with coal mining, the question is what comes first, the mine or the railroad? And it's going to be the railroad. And so the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad is going to be built from Richmond to Huntington, West Virginia. And in 1873, it's going to be finished right here at Hawksness. That's where the railroad meets, right in the middle. And so now they can get coal out of West Virginia and get it both to the Midwest and to the Atlantic seacoast. And so we're going to see lots of coal mines develop in particular here in Fayette County. So 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, the 1900s. Fayette County is going to be the largest coal producing county in the state of West Virginia. McDowell will supersede Fayette County in 1910 and then continue on. But in the early part of history, Fayette County is going to be number one, and then it'll be number two right behind McDowell County. And it's going to take the building of this railroad right here through this New River Gorge to make this all possible. So you think about what it took for those people to build that railroad down in that gorge. It's crazy to think about. One thing I would mention is if you ever have the opportunity to ride the Amtrak Cardinal, you can get picked up in Huntington, you can get picked up in Charleston, you can get picked up in Montgomery, is you actually take this train track to Washington, D.C. I have done it one time, and I can tell you, coming through here and seeing stops like Thurmond and Prince was just awesome. And so I would highly recommend to anybody who's from West Virginia, if you want to have a cool experience, you should definitely take the Amtrak from Charleston to Washington, D.C. Here at West Virginia History with Mrs. B, we talk a lot about disasters, and one of those disasters we're going to talk about today is the Hawks Nest Tunnel disaster. What happened is in the 1930s, Union Carbide wanted to build a tunnel through this mountain that we're standing on right now, Gauley Mountain, and they wanted to divert water from the New River to the Gauley River so that they could generate hydroelectricity. And it was in the Depression. There were a lot of people who needed work, especially African Americans, and so Union Carbide got this idea of, let's hire people for really low wages, 35 cents an hour, and let's drill this as quickly as possible. And so what ended up happening, they drilled a 3-mile diversion tunnel, and it was pure silica rock dust. And what ends up happening is the worst industrial disaster in American history. Union Carbide hires over 3,000 people to work on this tunnel. They admit years later that 109 people died. The reality is a congressional hearing is going to take place, and they will find that at least 476 people will die working on this tunnel, and researchers in the 1980s actually put that number at 764 people will die. The numbers are pretty staggering. Only 40% of people working on the tunnel lived longer than 2 months, and only 20% of them survived up to 6 months. They were breathing in pure silica particles, and it was causing silicosis, which is an occupational disease, which has been ruled now as an occupational disease and is against the law. What happened is Union Carbide, to save money, besides paying low wages, instead of using wet drills, because it was silica, it was sandstone, they used dry drills so it was quicker, and they end up killing hundreds and hundreds of people, and large numbers of African American individuals who came from the South or came from Virginia to work because there weren't jobs anywhere else. One of the saddest parts, I think, of the Hawks Nest Tunnel disaster is that the company thought so little of the people that died working on this tunnel that they actually just dumped them in the riverbed and then covered them up with rocks. But when other workers started poking around and local people started poking around, they realized they needed to move the bodies, and so they exhumed the bodies of African Americans, because remember, this is 1930s in the South. We're not going to bury white people and black people together. What ends up happening is they'll dig up the bodies of the African American workers, and they're going to put them in a mass grave 1 county over in Nicholas County on a farm. And so those bodies were forgot about for decades, and they've only been recently located, and the cemetery has only been recently preserved. What ends up happening here, we're going to see one of the first class action lawsuits against a company, and Union Carbide will be sued by the survivors of the Hawks Nest disaster. And survivors end up getting somewhere around $200,000, which is not a lot of money. And this is one of those stories, it's an untold story about West Virginia and about industrial history, but it's something that needs to be told because so many lives were lost here at Hawks Nest for something that could have been entirely prevented. If they'd only used wet drills instead of dry drills, none of this would have happened. Okay, y'all, so we have just walked a little bit around the corner. We wanted to show you, this is part of the gorge. This is where the Hawks Nest Dam diverts water into the tunnel to go to the Gauley River. And so this is still operational. It is still used today. They've been working on it for about, I don't know, the last year and a half or so. It's been 85 years since they built this. And so this is still generating water today, and it's generating water for a large metallurgical plant down at Alloy, which was run by Union Carbide at one time until Union Carbide basically broke up in the 1990s. So the need for power led to Union Carbide basically ignoring any kind of safety standards and, you know, taking lives to produce cheap water power. Hey y'all, we are with another West Virginia highway marker. This is one that's right up here on Route 60 Midland Trail that talks about the Hawks Nest Tunnel. The one about the Hawks Nest disaster is hiding around a corner. This one is about the tunnel itself. It says it's the mouth of the Great Hawks Nest Tunnel is here. The tunnel is 3 miles long and diverts water from the New River from its 5-mile-long gorge, and that the tunnel is through solid rock, and that there's a 50-foot dam that gives a waterfall of 160 feet for electric power. Of course, this sign mentions nothing about the human toll. So, you know, a government source is great and all, but you have to read between the lines and you have to really know what's happening. And the fact that the over 700 lives that were lost in building this tunnel is mentioned nowhere on the sign makes me kind of sick to my stomach. So, you know, as historians, as people who love history, you have to be able to read between the lines. You have to do the research. You have to look for other sources. You can't just look to a historic road marker created by the government to get your information. So I think it's important to use this maybe as your starting place. Look at the highway markers as the Wikipedia of driving around the West Virginia Mountain State, and when you get home you dig deeper and you learn more about the people and the people's lives who were affected by the building of things like tunnels. Thanks y'all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to West Virginia History with Mrs. B on both Facebook and YouTube.